Good morning, good afternoon. Today I just want to go over as much of section 3 as we can. On Canvas, you should be able to find your fill in the blank notes for section 3. You should also be able to find this PowerPoint. So if you need to get those notes on Canvas now, you might want to pause the video. Okay, so chapter 1, section 3, we're still in the science of biology. All right, but section 3 goes specifically over what biology is, and it's titled Studying Life. All right, so we'll start with the definition. Um, Bio means life, and ology means study, right? So biology is the study of life. Um, what do biologists do? All right. Well, there's a lot of different things that biologists do. So one of them is study the diversity of life. So if you'll notice the picture there, that's a lady named Jane Goodall, and she worked with chimpanzees starting, I think, in the 1960s. And she was the first person to discover a lot of new information about chimps, including like how complex they were and how complex their social systems are. So that's something interesting uh, to learn when you're studying the diversity of species. The next thing, sorry, that's my dog. The next thing that biologists do is research diseases, right? Oftentimes, almost always, diseases are caused by living things. If a some diseases are caused by bacteria, some diseases are caused by parasites, or sometimes even like fungi or molds. And some diseases, of course, are caused by a virus. All of those things, except for viruses, all of those things that make you sick are living, and obviously they make living things sick. So that's one of the things that biologists do as well. The next one is develop technologies. Biologists develop technologies. Specifically in biology, we're probably going to focus more on biotechnology, which is technology that somehow helps living organisms. It can include maybe like robotic prosthetics, like you see in the picture there, but it doesn't have to. It could be other technologies that help living things too. Um, so that's developing technologies. The next one is improving agriculture. That's a big one too. I can tell you right now that there's a special rice that was in the last few years was developed so that it had more vitamins and nutrients in it. Because people in certain places were getting really sick from not getting enough nutrients. And so scientists came up with a genetically modified rice called golden rice. And if you want to look that up, you can. Otherwise, we'll talk about it a little bit in a few months. But that's one of the things that biologists do. And finally, and these are all important. Finally, biologists preserve the environment. We have to preserve the environment. Um, there's so many products we get from the environment. The most obvious ones are we get our food from the environment, we get materials like cotton and wood from the environment, but the environment also gives us services as well. It cleans healthy environments, I should say. Healthy, thriving environments clean the air for us so we can breathe clean air. Healthy environments also filter and clean drinking water for us. Um, Healthy environments provide us with a lot of different medicines and drugs that we need. So there's it's that is also preserving the environment is a really important thing that biologists do as well. Again, All of these are important. You need to know all of them. Um, it wouldn't hurt to maybe like have an example of each or even be able to discuss each. Um, they're all important. All right. So, since we're talking about life, the characteristics of life, what is life? What is an organism? How do you define a living thing? Okay. If I asked you to define life or define a living thing, I think sometimes we might get a little stuck because I know a lot of times we'll say, oh, well, living things have to take in food or nutrients. Well, your car has to take in gas. I mean, it's not a nutrient, but your car has to take in gas. It has to take in materials. So maybe we need to be a little bit more specific. And then a lot of times we'll say, well, living things move. Well, your toy train moves, and the wind moves, water can move, right? And not all living things move. Plants don't really move. They stay in one spot all their lives. So movement maybe not necessarily is a must. So scientists came up with 8 characteristics of life. In other words, all living things have to have these 8 characteristics in order to be considered living or an organism. And that's what an organism is. An organism is anything that has or once had all of the following characteristics. Let's go on to the characteristics. But also, this YouTube link here, if you would, I'm going to pause this actually. Okay, sorry about that. I want to just show you a short video that gives you hopefully some things to think about before I go into the 8 characteristics of life. So just bear with me here. It's short, it's not very long. Okay, so I thought that would be I thought that was kind of nice. All right, so let's go over the eight characteristics of life. Again, um, if you or something you know thinks that you're living or you're an organism, then you have to have all eight of these characteristics. And I'm going to start with the most important one that really kind of trumps all the other ones, no pun intended. Alrighty. So the first characteristic of life is that all living things have to be made of at least one cell. Um, if you take a look, I have an example of some unicellular organisms right here. These are paramecia. They live in fresh water. Normally, you cannot see them without a microscope. This is one cell here. That's a paramecium. Here's its little friend. There's another paramecium there. And then this one, the picture got cut off, but this is an example of a unicellular organism. An example of a multicellular organism would be a human, right? So we do start out as just one cell, like I talked about yesterday, but by the time you're full grown, the average human will probably be made or composed of trillions of cells. Alrighty, so again, the first characteristic is all living things must be made of one or more cells, and you should know the definition of the cell. I have given you a very short definition here, but the definition could be a little bit longer. But we're just going to stick to the basics for now. A cell is the basic unit of life. All right. Characteristic number 2 displays organization. All living things are organized. Your bodies are organized, plants are organized, even that little single-celled paramecium that I just showed you, even a single little cell is highly organized. And if you take a look, let me give you an example here. I love this diagram because it gives you an example of a highly organized animal, but also a highly organized plant, right? So let's start out from little to small. So all living things are made of cells. So here's a cell. This is an animal cell up here. This is a plant cell down here. Alrighty. Again, cells are organized. They have very specific organelles to do certain jobs, and those organelles work together to make the cell. Then you have tissues. Tissues are a group of cells, the same types of cells that work together to do another job. So, for example, your muscle cells work together to make muscle tissue. Alrighty. In plants, maybe the leaf cells work together to make leaf tissue. Alrighty. Then those tissues, you'll have different types of tissues working together to make organs like the heart and the leaf here, right? So your heart is an organ. It's made of mostly muscle tissue. Sorry about that. That was my dog again. Where was I? Organs. Hearts. Hearts are made of muscle tissue, but they're also made of connective tissue. They're also made of there's some nerve tissue in there. So organs are highly organized. Same thing with leaves. Leaves are made of, leaf cell tissue, but they're also made of con, gosh darn it, what's it called? Of the tissue that helps the leaf move water throughout itself. Then the organs work together to make organ systems. So for example, in plants, you would have the root system, you would have the vascular system, and you would have maybe like the leaf system as well. Animals, you're going to have the digestive system, the nerve system, and so on. And then finally, these highly organized systems work together to complete the one single whole organism, like you see here. So all living things display organization And that's what that means, that all living things, in other words, are highly organized. Their bodies are organized. The next characteristic of life, number 3, is growth and development. All living things grow, even if it's just a little bit, and all living things develop. Some develop more than others. So, first of all, for growth, growth is simply getting bigger. That's what that means. Now, most living things, the way they get bigger is by making more cells. So if you were to compare the number of cells in a baby and then compare that to the number of cells in your bodies, the reason you're bigger is because you have way, way more cells than a baby would. Same thing with a blue whale. A blue whale has way more cells than we do because a blue whale has way more cells. That's how growth works. The development part is the natural changes that an organism goes through during its life. And one of the nicest examples is the frog, right? So those go through really drastic changes during their lifetimes. They start out as little tadpoles when they're born, and they do get bigger, they grow, but as they're growing, not only are they getting bigger, they also start to grow limbs, and they start to lose their tail, and by the time it's all said and done, the frog looks nothing like the tadpole. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and remove these pictures so you can get all of the notes. Okay, so here are the notes. Grows and a living thing grows and develops. Growth is the increase in size. Don't forget that the increase in size comes from making more cells if you're a multicellular organism. And then the development part is the natural changes that occur in the life of an organism. Okay, so let me put those pictures back. So here's an example of an organism growing and developing. Plants develop, right? I'm sure you've noticed that the acorns that oak trees come from look nothing alike, right? And also they're much bigger as well. So there's an example there, and here's the other picture I had up earlier. All right, and then we can go on to characteristic number 4, which is reproduces. All living things reproduce. All living things reproduce. Now, I know that once in a while, there might be an organism, especially like for humans, sometimes some people cannot reproduce, they're not able to have babies, but overall, as a species, some of us or most of us need to be able to reproduce simply for the sake of our survival. We want to survive as a species, and the only way we can survive as a species is if we have babies, right? Now, there's 2 types of reproduction. There's asexual reproduction, in which an organism does not need a partner to make offspring or babies. Alrighty, that's asexual reproduction. In sexual reproduction, you need 2 individuals or 2 partners to make a baby. Alrighty? Humans are sexual reproducers. Humans need 2 people, a man and his wife, to make babies, right? Um, all mammals are sexual reproducers. So that's reproduction. The 5th characteristic of life is responding to stimuli. All living things have to be able to respond to stimuli. In other words, all living things have to be able to respond to what's going on so that they can survive. So, for example, if you put your hand on a really, really hot stove, right? The stimulus to you is the hot, hot stove. And your response is to move your hand right away because it's a survival thing. you're automatically trying not to cause damage to your body. Plants respond, and this is of course a very special example, but it's such a cool example here. Venus flytraps. In this example, the fly tickling the trap would be the stimulus, and the plant's response is to close the trap and catch the bug so that it can basically eat the bug, right? It's a survival mechanism. That's how the Venus flytrap survives. It receives the stimulus of the bug tickling its trap, and then the response is to eat it for nutrients. Okay. Again, you do need to know what a stimulus and a response are. If you don't know, I just explained it, but you can also find it in your textbook as well. Okay. And the sixth characteristic of life is requires energy and nutrients. All living things require energy to keep you going and to keep all of that work that goes on in the inside your body to be fueled. But living things also need nutrients. The nutrients that you eat, in other words, the food that you eat, that food is eventually going to turn in to the building materials that make you, that make your body, right? So that's why we need energy and nutrients. We need the energy to keep us going and keep us fueled, and we need the food for literally for building materials. Okay, so let me just remove these pictures so you can get all of the notes. There we go. All right, all living things require energy and nutrients for work and for building materials. In other words, the building materials that make up your body. All right. Characteristic number 7 maintains homeostasis. Homeostasis means keeping an internal balance, such as temperature and water levels. All living things have to maintain homeostasis. Even plants have to maintain homeostasis. Um, and again, some examples for us humans would be we have to keep our bodies as close to 98.6 degrees as possible. We have to have a certain amount of water in our bodies so that everything can literally work smoothly and fluidly. And plants and bacteria do this too as well. And then finally, I'm trying to kind of hurry so you guys can go to your next class. Finally, the next one is adaptations evolve over time. So all living, now this one's a little bit different. All living things as a group, as a species, not an individual organism, but as a group, all living things have to be able to evolve over time, um, or they might not survive as a species. Okay, and here is a neat organism of the evolution of the whale. So I don't know if you knew this or not, but whales uh, were, or the ancestors of whales, I should say, not whales themselves, the ancestors of whales were originally four-legged land mammals. And over time, as a species, not individually, but as a species, the species started going through changes. And so if you'll notice, here is the original ancestor of the whale, and many species later, we have the modern day whale, right? So again, over time, the earth is going to change. And we as living things have to be able to tolerate those changes. If we cannot tolerate those changes, we won't survive. And that's where evolution comes in. And we will talk a lot more about evolution um, later on in the school year. All right. And then I'm going to go ahead and stop here because this has taken a lot of your time. and I'll finish the rest up tomorrow. Sorry it took so long. Good luck, and I hope you guys have a really good weekend.